Okay, so the gospel from Detroit. Roughly in the year 2012, the Presbytery of Detroit was preparing for the coming of the General Assembly to Detroit. The Committee on Local Arrangements was working on a promotional film to take to the General Assembly, the 220th General Assembly in Pittsburgh. So we were at a Presbytery meeting and we looked at the film and we sort of raised the question, what Detroit was that the COLA captured? I mean, you know, it was a nice anesthetized presentation of the Presbytery of Detroit. So the Committee on Local Arrangements went back and they edited and redid their promotional clip. It was still a sterile presentation, but it was taken to Pittsburgh to highlight the upcoming General Assembly. Also at the Pittsburgh General Assembly, I was elected to serve on the Advisory Committee for Social Witness Policy, so that's called AC SWAP. So after being elected to serve on AC SWAP, I'm sitting at a meeting in 2013, a meeting of AC SWAP. And so they're talking about the upcoming General Assembly in Detroit, and I raised the question, is anybody interested in Detroit? Does anybody really know what's going on in Detroit? So the committee started talking about it. We started talking about all of the issues that were facing, the challenges that were facing Detroit, the impending bankruptcy. We were talking about corporate abandonment, the whole implications of the hijacking of the democratic system, the setting aside of local elected officials, crime, abandonment, you know, racial polarization. So the committee decided to commission two of the members, myself and Gloria Albrecht. Gloria was also on the committee. She's University of Detroit Christian ethics professor. So Gloria and I sat down and we drew up this paper, this narrative of Detroit. And it was juxtaposed in between the two polarity, in between the polarity of the theme for the General Assembly, which was abound in hope, as well as the declaration of the churches of the Black Presbyterian Caucus, the Michigan Black Presbyterian Caucus, and they had decided that the churches in the city of Detroit were in crisis. So you had the General Assembly COLA theme of abound in hope, and the Black Presbyterian Caucus churches in crisis. And so we came up with the Gospel from Detroit. The Gospel from Detroit did a narrative background about what had taken place in the city over the course of maybe 50, 60 years. At the highlight of the paper is the chronicling of the Presbytery of Detroit's history over that period. And so in 1960, there were 44 churches in the Presbytery in the city of Detroit, 44 Presbyterian churches in the city of Detroit and Highland Park, and 36 had full-time pastors. In 1990, there were 19 churches in Detroit and Highland Park. 16 of them had full-time pastors. In 2013, there were 11 churches in the city of Detroit, and 4 of them had full-time pastors: Jefferson Avenue, Westminster, Fort Street, and Calvary. So this was the Gospel from Detroit, chronicling the history of this region, the challenges of this region, and in particular the history of the Presbyterian presence, the continually diminishing presence of the Presbyterian Church in a city that the challenges just grew exponentially. And so at the General Assembly that was held in Detroit, the 221st General Assembly, the General Assembly voted or commissioned the Presbyterian Mission Agency to convene an urban roundtable. And the primary responsibility of the urban roundtable was to examine issues of race, class, and trends in urban ministry. And so it used the gospel from Detroit as its primary resource. And so the Urban Roundtable met in 2015 in Chicago. There were about 12 representatives that were designated for the Urban Roundtable, primarily pastors, but not exclusively pastors. There was, I think, a couple of lay leaders. So we had representatives from across the United States. So what we're trying to do is create maybe perhaps a resource guide to provide to the General Assembly that can be incorporated into the resources that could be used throughout the PCUSA to talk about what works and what some of the learnings have been from our roundtable discussions. In 2015, Planning and Visioning decided to use the gospel from Detroit as a catalyst to establish a theme for focus for the year of 2016. And so the focus for 2016 became seeking the welfare of the city. And it was based upon the prophetic writings in the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, where the letter is written to the exiles and telling them to seek the welfare of the city into which they had been sent, and pray on behalf of the city, for in the welfare of the city you will find your welfare. So we have internalized that to understand that it is in the welfare of the cities which the Presbytery of Detroit represents and encompasses. It is in the welfare of those cities that the individual constituent churches will find their welfare. And so we've been trying to roll out this conversation throughout the Presbytery, and we decided to bring in featured speakers for the year. I was the first featured speaker to sort of roll out the gospel from Detroit for the General Presbytery. The second speaker was Brian Smith, the pastor of Geneva Canton, who was to talk about issues of white privilege and his learning experience as a pastor in Canton, and the learning experience of Geneva Canton church members. The third speaker was John Gallagher, who is a writer for the Detroit Free Press, and he painted a broad stroke of the history of the metropolitan region and some of his observations about what are some of the challenges that have faced Detroit. The fourth speaker will be Imam Mustafa El-Turk, who will talk about issues of cross-cultural dynamics about the region, of the Islamic presence, some of the tensions and some of the wonderful opportunities that have presented themselves for partnerships and collaboration with non-Islamic communities within the region. And then the fifth speaker is going to be Gloria Albrecht, who co-authored the Gospel from Detroit with myself. So we're going to bookend the year and basically see where we go into 2017. So.